forest. Hope all's well. Dandelion here. Decided to take you all on a little adventure to look for some plants and mushrooms. Currently walking a stream, getting my tripod set up. Currently walking a stream looking for chanterelles, which are just about to start popping. There's lots of blueberries just about to start forming. So just take you all on an adventure. Hopefully we'll find some chanterelles. So I like to look for chanterelles along streams, so I always want water. You can see there's a stream down there. Aha! So there's a mushroom. It's of course not a chanterelle. It's hard to know what it may be. It could be a cortinaris. It has a bulbous base, right, and sort of purplish gills, but no cortina, which is very indicative of a cortinaris. So hard to tell, but not a chanterelle. So by water really helps the mushrooms just have that humidity in the air to proliferate. It's a beautiful area here. Nice spot. But it's definitely coming, that stream is definitely coming out of the city, so I'm not too interested in bathing in there or hanging out in that water, although it's been a hot week. I'm also looking for lion's mane mushrooms, so on beech trees right now, scanning any bark with kind of beaten up wood. You can find a nice lion's mane mushroom. It's a bit early in the season, but you can be lucky. And also scanning down logs, hardwoods, for chicken of the woods. And you might be able to find some oyster mushrooms too. So the rains are definitely coming, but so far the mushrooms have not been super prolific. It's your mushroom update with Dandelion. I've been still harvesting garlic mustard, still harvesting violet leaves, goutweed, and I've been making stir fries and sautés out of that combination. So those are still out and about, and really nutritious, delicious, and yummy. Just scanning the area currently for orange colors, and I know they're out there. Might be a little too early. Another plant that's starting to come up, or really almost its own organism, are Monotropa uniflora, otherwise known as ghost pipe, which have some semi-poisonous and also very medicinal aspects to them. There's some coral, first time seeing that. And those Monotropa, first of all, they're pretty rare, and second of all, they're pretty incredible for actually pain. So they're almost beyond an analgesic. They are a dissociative anesthetic. But one should be very careful with working with ghost pipe, because dosage is everything and preparation is everything. And of course sustainable harvest is everything. So you need all those factors to really consider that you have what we may call as a medicine. Otherwise you may have something that's improperly made, and you may take too high of a dose. And I don't know that it's necessarily deadly poisonous, but may make you vomit. But it's commonly known that those ghost pipe are not only a dreaming herb, lucid dreaming herb of sorts, but also really help reduce pain. What's up? Many blessings, Mickey. Thanks for joining. So those, there's like a cabin up there. It's kind of cool. A little shack. So, a dissociative anesthetic is really helpful for times of extreme pain, like if you have, a broken leg or something. Ghost pipe can definitely be helpful, but doesn't kind of numb your other senses in that particular way. So to kind of distance you from the pain. So that's a very different effect than maybe taking Percocets or OxyContin or anything like that. It has, less of a severe ability to tune you out from yourself. And so that's of course helpful when you still want to recognize your pain signals in your body, because of course if you turn off all the pain signals in your body, then you won't necessarily know what hurts. You won't know where to limit yourself, and that's the increased chance of re-injury, which happens a lot with people taking painkillers. So ghost pipe is one of those herbs which can help kind of mend that process. Of course, kratom, Kratom, is reputed to be an amazing helper with managing pain. But of course, managing pain is always one part of what we need to address when we're dealing with pain. A big factor also is, why do we have pain in the first place? So without kind of addressing that, we're just putting another band-aid. So that's what I like to call using herbs allopathically. Herbs are here to help us restore our balance, not to numb us to the bad patterns that we're doing. This is an interesting plant I've been seeing around. It looks like some kind of orchid. Not sure what it is. It's not rattlesnake plantain, which is one of those around here, but it's a nice bell flower. Somebody's tangerine. There's an orange. Not exactly the orange I'm looking for. Welcome, friends. What's up, Jassy? So I'm just scanning the area for chicken of the woods or chanterelles, and it might be a little early on that, but it's good to kind of keep tuning your senses in. Beautiful butterfly, swallowtail, and shalom, shalom, shanti, shanti, peace, peace. So just finished up a Massachusetts tour, and I've been slowly headed down back to New Jersey to kind of stock back up. So this weekend I'll be teaching at Cherry Valley Cooperative. That'll be a really fun time. I get to reconnect with those friends there, so check that out. Feel free to come if you live in New Jersey. And then I'll also be teaching that Sunday herbalism, healing, and sacred plants. So that'll be another fun class. If you're in the Jersey area, please feel free to come. And then I'm headed to Permajam, which is in northern New Jersey, and there we'll have our lots of herbal goodies, and I'll be teaching classes there. Belladonna is not poisonous unless you ingest it, so don't forget. No mushroom is poisonous if you don't eat it. No plant is poisonous if you don't consume them. And a lot of plants and mushrooms that are poisonous to humans are medicinal or edible to many important insects or many important animal species. So blueberries are still green. It's a really interesting area here. Hopefully I don't turn the corner to a bear, but the louder I talk, the less the chances are. So we're kind of getting out of what we'd call the mushroom territory. Bracken fern, and hopefully we'll hit another patch of woods here. This kind of meadow area is a totally different habitat. You get totally different plants, but you definitely won't get a moist area with lots of mushrooms. So mushrooms really like the understory of the forest. So here we are again in the woods. So also, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. Any herbal foraging questions. What are you looking for lately? Have you found any mushrooms? All those fun things. Man, I just want to find a big chicken of the woods. I'm really craving mushrooms, and just hasn't been so prolific. So I'm currently in northern New Jersey, and I've literally gone to like 3 state parks today, just scanning around, looking for some cool spots. And this is a pretty cool place. There definitely are bears here, but not very many. Northwestern New Jersey, there's a lot of bears, and of course we're taking away their habitat, and so they have nowhere else to go. So it looks like there's lots of bears, but actually they're just being pushed out because we're cutting down the forest in an alarming rate. So they need to go further to look for habitat, and that's when they get into suburban areas. Also, if you wanted to make a bear trap, the best bear trap you can probably engineer is a giant garbage dumpster. So can't really expect that they're not going to come looking at a free lunch. If you build it, they will come. Always listen for trees. Hey Tanner, good question. Would chicken of the woods be growing in Durango, Colorado this time of year? What time would be better? I'm not so familiar with Colorado. I would say it's probably a couple weeks too early, but that's just a guess. So you may be able to find them. Of course, in Colorado, you should connect up with the Telluride Mushroom Festival. They'll really know much more. I haven't done much foraging for mushrooms in Colorado. I was there last winter, a couple times before that, and saw all kinds of cool things like prairie dogs. I was actually in Denver, and or outside of Denver, and literally just like drove to the nearest park, and it was actually like a whole habitat of prairie dogs, and they were just so amazing. And it's obviously very rare coming from the East Coast that there's just all these prairie dogs. Like that's what's happening in Colorado. So in Colorado, they of course see them as kind of a nuisance, but they were very novel and special to me. And then heard lots of coyotes every night. So I haven't found too many mushrooms in Colorado, but did find several species of Artemisia, kind of sagebrushes. Lots of other good fun things. Lots of mountains, lots of snow. Lots of cold weather in the winter. Just getting to the fact of goldenrod starting to come into its flowering, so that's something we want to look out for. Goldenrod is pretty tricky to harvest. If you harvest it too late, it just turns out to go to seed as you're dehydrating it. So you don't want that to happen. Then your medicine kind of spends itself. Goldenrod's really helpful for the urinary tract, bladder, kidneys, kind of a affinity for water. So you see all these big downed trees. That's one thing I'm definitely scanning for. You can definitely find chicken of the woods. Sean, I have prepared chicken of the woods in a lot of different ways. One of my standards is I'll just chop it and use an oil, butter, coconut oil, whatever, and saute it up for like 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, and then crack some eggs in there and kind of egg batter it. That's really good. And then add some hot sauce. Other options are, one time we took, wow, I think I'm gonna snag some of this garlic mustard while I'm here. One time we took really nice chicken of the woods. The leaves are kind of beat up here. I don't want these light green leaves so much. There's a couple good ones in there, or bug eaten. I mean, they would be fine. Definitely okay to eat. So just a couple out of there. And one time we took Parmesan cheese, chia seed, and almond flour, and we kind of breaded and battered the chicken of the woods, and then I fried it in coconut oil. Here is violet leaves, which are just huge at this point. So I'll just really take one or two of each plant, and this way it gives them the ability to still be regenerated. So that's a good handful. So now I'm getting garlic, mustard, and violet. So that'll be in my next saute. Maybe breakfast, some eggs and greens, something like that. So the fried chicken of the woods was definitely pretty epic, and that was definitely amazing and really fun, and I want to try that more. So like, if you're gonna eat fried chicken, it's pretty much the healthiest and best way to do it, you know? So if you're gonna fry something, obviously frying it in coconut oil is gonna be way better than frying it in some hydrogenated rancid oil, or even olive oil, which doesn't have a high heat point. So olive oil is not really good to cook with. Olive oil is really supposed to be a cold pressed oil that's not heated. So olive oil is good to put on salads or drizzle over things after you cook them, but it's not really good to fry in, although people do it all the time. But that's a little known fact that should get you thinking. There's a whole problem with oils, as a whole. Oil is something that we take for granted as far as how wide of a field, how many thousands and thousands of miles it takes to grow a monocrop of those plants to press oil. So it is not regenerative, it is definitely not sustainable. And then on top of that, you have shipping. So even if it is a so-called vegetarian oil, it still is causing a lot of environmental degradation. So we don't often think of that. So one of the things I've been experimenting with, of course, is procuring my own local fats and figuring out what sustainable ways of doing that are. So you basically have to weigh, there are animals. Animals take a lot of resources to grow. Factory farming is horrendous, no matter what. And then consider, coconut oil, right? It comes from really far away. We're cutting down the rainforest as the modern world demands more and more coconut oil. And we're shipping it. It's, in shipping crates and containers and plastic and all kinds of things like that. And then the fossil fuels to ship it are also very costly and harmful to the ecosystem. So the reason of mentioning this is to just try to make that conversation a little more gray than very black and white. I think a lot of times we think in this modern world, oh, well, it's vegetable, it's ethical, it's animal, it's unethical. And I think it's really important that yes, that is true if you're talking about buying from the supermarket, but what about if you're talking about your own local production? And so, cashews are yummy, and they come from really far away. They're actually in the poison ivy family. It is very toxic to the people who process the cashews. Those poison ivy-like compounds go airborne, cause all kinds of respiratory problems to those people. So those are indentured servants. So we don't usually think of that when we think of cashews in the grocery store, which is already at the shelf, which seems ethical because it has these stickers that kind of convince our subconscious mind that it came from heaven. And so there's really a lot more to explore as far as where our food sources come from, especially when it's related to fat, which I think we've all oversimplified largely to the fact that the anti-fat industry, blaming basically cholesterol on heart attacks, was very oversimplified and is proving to be less true than we once thought it was. Oddly, cholesterol is responsible for hormone production in a human, so we have all these thyroid issues, which makes me wonder. But also cholesterol, just as much as it's blamed on causing arterial plaque, it also is responsible for lubricating the arteries to stop the plaque from forming. So we should just be very careful about inconclusive research funded by other industries at the time. There's a lot of cross-demonization. So the dairy industry is funding against the sugar industry, is funding against the wheat industry, is funding against, all these corporate interests, which are trying to make us think that there's this one global diet for all people and it could be ethical. And I don't think that's true. I think what's true is that everyone has a different locale with different availability, with different seasons, and that's supposed to be honored and really respected. Tanner mentions, can I speak about sweetgrass? Can you eat or drink it? You can definitely drink it. I wouldn't consider sweetgrass as a food, but I'm sure you could apply it in your foods. Sweetgrass is an amazing sacred plant, so I wouldn't necessarily consider it something to just chop up and add in my stir fry, although you probably could. But it has a really potent medicinal quality as well as historical quality, and basically when I was at the International Herb Symposium, the what do you call that? The main teacher of the Saturday evening was a woman named Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, actually, which talks all about kind of indigenous perspectives and how science is vilifying those indigenous perspectives. And she told some very beautiful stories, and also Linda Black Elk, who I'd gone to her classes at the International Herb Symposium. She also talked about sweetgrass. I think there's some big machine coming by. And so one of the beautiful takeaways that I got about sweetgrass was that I remember Linda Black Elk mentioning one plant. If you take one plant away from a culture, you take hundreds of stories away. And so there's this great story that the native people of North America would teach about sweetgrass, that they were braiding Mother Earth's hair. And so anytime they would braid the sweetgrass, they felt that they were in that very intimate connection with the earth itself. And it turns out that those grasses on the Great Plains, usually think of, North Dakota, South Dakota, etc., but there actually is something called the North American Serengeti. And it actually was, just like we think of the Serengeti, the great grasslands, that's what all of basically the Midwest looked like up to Canada. And that was where hundreds of thousands of bison and probably some sort of wildebeest species, some grazing, herding animal, definitely elk, deer, all those species were there. And they would graze on those grasses. And those grasses actually have tremendously long roots. And those roots, when undisturbed, get bigger and bigger and bigger and provide this massive network of sequestration of carbon. And so when we've destroyed that ecosystem and we've taken away the buffalo, we didn't realize that there was some, several million, 100-million-year-old process going on there to basically restore the carbon cycle. And basically the buffalo foraging on those wild lands were actually creating a semi-carbon neutral situation. Now we have cows which are doing exactly the opposite. They're belching methane and other unsustainable gases, largely because they're fed corn, so they all have basically indigestion. And that is the two options basically in our society. So, sweetgrass kind of brings us to understanding those prairies and their role in our health as a species, and really the planetary health. And so we need to kind of return to understanding those grasslands and the restoration of them, and how that's really significant towards the ecological transformation that we all need so that we can survive. So sweetgrass is a very special plant, and has a tremendous history in it, and we all need to remember that history. Actually, when I was at the Medicine Wheel Festival in northern New Jersey, Sussex County, there's a great man, his name is Paul, and he grows what he calls a medicine wheel garden. And there is tons of plants, and he watches them around a circle, and he watches them travel. And he tells these stories of their sentience and their aliveness. And so this year he taught me about sweetgrass, and I had not really identified it very well. It looks almost exactly like any other grass, and it doesn't even smell very strong unless you dry it. So it's a very interesting set of chemicals in there which actually are activated by dehydration, drying. And he had some there, and he actually burned it, and so I smudged on his homegrown sweetgrass, and that felt really powerful. So yeah, check out Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Kimmerer, Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, and that will hopefully plug you back in to the time when the buffalo roamed and the deer and the antelope played. Christine mentions, how does one begin to stop shopping and start foraging? It seems so complex. Where do I start? Really great question. The easiest thing to tell you is don't widen your scope, narrow your scope. Look for a few plants. Like right now, what I've predominantly been eating a lot of is garlic mustard, violets, goutweed. So every day I come out of the woods with a couple handfuls of those 3 species. So if those were the only 3 species I knew, that would be tons of food. You know, I would have greens every single day to eat from. So you can do potatoes and greens, or you can do eggs and greens, or you can do greens chopped up in a stew, or whatever you're going to do. You can incorporate that into whatever meal you are going to make. And every bit of that you kind of can achieve is you retracting yourself out of the grocery store into the land. And there are very easy regenerative ways to harvest any of those plants. So, you know, narrow your scope and only look for a few species and look in the right habitat, you know. So then you narrow it down. Okay, does garlic mustard like to grow in the middle of the woods? Not as often as in a field, right, or on the edges of the woods. So, you know, try to get familiar with a couple of species and incorporate them into your diet on a regular basis, and that's really one of the best starts, you know. And then you just wean yourself. It's like in the first grocery store in North America was in 1950. That's not very long ago. So we only have like 2 or 3 generations where we got so used to this process. But you know, those 3 generations was a weaning away from our self-reliance and into a grocery store shopping mentality. So allow it to take time to revamp yourself back out. And that means, you know, look local and try to make friends with farmers and build community around your area where you can then either wild harvest together or trade wild harvested foods for their farm fresh vegetables, and kind of symbiotize those different ecological niches so that we can get off the grocery store and into the communities. And that's really what we need to do. So you're seeing in the last couple of years, like eggs, local eggs, pastured eggs are much easier to get now than they have been in maybe the last 10 years. We're starting to see traces of that. So just know that every bit of money, you know, for me, it's like we vote with our dollars. And so every bit of money that you spend on your local farmer, or you don't have to spend because you're foraging, is a vote, you know. And that's instead of going to Walmart and voting for Walmart, or now, if you've seen the new news, Amazon.com just bought Whole Foods, and so they're going to make this basically this giant conglomerate animated shipping. You know, we're going to get Whole Foods to our door, and nobody's going to go to the supermarket anymore. So if you don't want to keep giving your energy, your power into that, then every dollar at a time, you know, retracted from that totalitarian global economy into your local economy is the way of bringing those foods back, bringing the people back to spend time farming and foraging instead of, you know, buying it from Mexico and buying it from Thailand and buying it from Ethiopia and buying it from all over the place. And, you know, there's a reasonable thing, and it's think about 70% local and 30% exotic. So have your cashews, have your coconut oil, whatever it is. I eat those things too. But try to make most of your diet local, most of your diet from your own hands. And I mean, if that was the policy, the global policy that we were all engaging in, obviously that's a lot of fossil fuel saved. You know, that's a lot of habitat destruction that we didn't do. So I think we just need to retract ourselves and be patient about the process. And that's kind of why I was talking about those fats, because I've been foraging now for probably over 15 years. And I started out as a vegan, and I switched to being a vegetarian, and I now can pretty much forage. I don't need any green vegetables from the store, but I still need carbohydrates and I still need fats. And you know, that's what people don't really seem to think, because if you go a long time eating just greens, then eventually you're going to get to the store and you're going to splurge on some fats, and they came from somewhere, and that process ends up embedding us into a certain market. And so every time we buy coconut oil, we are saying yes to deforestation of, you know, a lot of jungle. Now, there are ways to do it better, right? So be fair trade, you know, try to be as sustainable as possible, buy in bulk, all those kind of things are totally options, you know. So that's one way of kind of cutting off the shipping. Don't buy 8 ounces at a time, buy, you know, a large amount, 5-gallon buckets at a time, things like that. How's it going? Pretty good. Yeah, thank you, Christine. It's really good to share. And these are the skills and the teachings that we need to kind of revamp ourselves with. And we have to look at this, the movement that we all want is obviously going to come from the ground up. It is a truly grassroots movement. And so when you become educated in the process of where your food comes from, always ask that question. Read the labels, look at what's in the ingredients are, and then look at where it came from and try to figure out who harvested it or what was going on in that area. And the more we can do that and the more we can become educated about that process, the less we'll fall prey to kind of stickers, and that's what I think is an issue. It's too easy to slap a vegetarian sticker on something like a cucumber, like, oh, now it's vegetarian, cucumbers, oh, this must be ethical. It kind of tricks people. It kind of tricks our minds. And so you're seeing that with GMO free. Now anything that could be sprayed from aerial sprayers with horrible pesticides but doesn't have genetically modified Roundup Ready genes in it could have a sticker that says GMO free. Now that is complete greenwashing. It doesn't mean it's healthy for you. It doesn't mean it's not sprayed with pesticides. It means that they lobbied to have a sticker on there because they know it tricks people. And so now it's still part of that awakening. We have to get to the next level of waking up. Okay, no more, falling prey to stickers. We need to demand, better quality foods, and we need to look locally as much as we can. And that's the thing. I mean, mung beans, I love mung beans and rice. That's a staple for me. I eat mung beans and rice at least a couple times a month, probably like 5 to 10 times a month. Well, it's coming from somewhere, and we're all eating, heavily monocultured mung beans and rice from wherever they come from. And it's very hard to get local in the sense of, I look for cattails, that would be an option, but I mean, in most of the area I'm traveling in, the place cattails grow are stagnated areas which are full of pollutants. All the runoff from cars, all the runoff from pesticide being sprayed on the side of the road, all those things end up in cattail habitat. So instead of being able to look local, as we've kind of fallen asleep and now are waking back up, we realize that it's been kind of a trick to get us all to spray our local foods. That is the greatest trick that's ever been put on humans, so that even if people woke up to the idea of eating locally and wanting to, get back to the land like that, now we have to deal with the fact that, wow, we've just been tricked to poison most of it. And that seems like a great way to block people from taking back their power. So we need to just be mindful that pesticides have never been indicated in healing anybody for anything. Lawn care chemicals have never shown to be healthy for anybody ever. So obviously more can be said about that, but it's definitely not helping people. It's definitely not healing people. It's definitely not providing fish in your local waterway. It's definitely not helping crayfish populations. It's definitely not helping frog populations. It's definitely poisoning deer. Right now, deer have spotty livers. They're toxic. So these are all your potential food sources, and no, it's not always the nicest thing to kill a deer and eat it. But when you're dealing with, well, is it a nice thing to enslave children in Thailand and make them pick your coconuts in the hot blazing sun and get paid nothing? That's the alternative. So again, it's not a black and white issue. It's a very gray issue, and it's being treated as this very easy thing. And yes, it can be easy as long as we're saying, well, if you go to the grocery store, then it should be all vegetables. Yes, that's true. But if you look to the earth, if you look to this as your grocery store, then it's a great educational process to figure out what you can actually harvest and live off from yourself. And now I have over 15 years experience, and so there's something to that. And so anybody who wants to make dietary claims about what is the correct diet should make sure that they've tried to live off the land for more than 25 days. Go in a tent in somewhere like this for 25 or 30 days and try to live off of what you can procure yourself. And unless you're in the equatorial plane, there's not going to be enough fat from vegetables out there to survive. And that's just a mathematical equation. In the Northeast, it's very difficult, especially in the winter. So we have to kind of broaden our understanding of how to get to the point where we can survive, the next 30 years as a species, because we are creating an unworkable situation and hoping that politicians will get us out of it or something. But I often think of, okay, so Flint, Michigan, right, in the United States, okay? We're not talking about Botswana, we're not talking about Uganda land, okay? There was some infrastructure issues. You would think in the United States, the richest country in the world, you know, FEMA or somebody could address that infrastructure issue. Well, it turns out they can't. And those people, just like all of us, would expect, oh man, if some sort of tragic thing like lead pipes, you know, are poisoning people, they would spend whatever, a couple $1 million or probably even less to repair that and get us all back to having fresh drinking water. But it turns out that even in the richest country in the world, that did not happen, and those people are still suffering. So don't think that you're safeguarded in the fact that, oh, well, your government will come save you, or the world will, you know, FEMA will come save you. It's not necessarily the truth, even on a small scale. We've seen that in every catastrophe so far. We saw that in Hurricane Katrina. We saw that on the East Coast with Hurricane Sandy and the other one. And so we then have to get back to the land. And what does that mean? And what can actually happen? That's where you all are the revolution in action. And every time you pick that wild vegetable, or every time you talk to that person about spraying their yard, or every time you talk to the state park about not dousing the lake with chemicals, anti-algae, antifungal substances, but trying to get them to see a broader perspective of ask the right questions. How does it harm the fish populations? What about the toxicity? Do they biouptake toxins? Because I want to live off of the land with my family, and you have a right to do that. That is as American as it gets. Daniel Boone is as American as it gets. So every time there's this runoff, these pollutants, these pesticides, they damage your ability to live off the land, mine as well. So that's the big question of how do we get back to the land in a way that is safe, you know? And there's a lot of things out there that aren't safe, you know? I mean, obviously something's falling out of the sky from airplanes. You don't have to call it anything, but even if it's jet fuel, it's not the most healthy thing to be breathing in. So we are living in a ever toxic world, and the only solution seems to be to get back to the land and start teaching people about ecology and nature. So that is my life work, and I appreciate you all for helping to support that. And I'll be teaching all over the place in my Foragemobile. Stay tuned on all my fun adventures on either Instagram at Return to Nature, or my YouTube channel, Return to Nature Skills, or this page. And my website is returntonature.us. Please consider checking out the GoFundMe page or making any donation, and your donations help me get Wi-Fi and the other connections to continue to teach live and both in person. Hope to see you all soon. Many blessings.